I'm really in the dark, and I can't figure out why.
Uh-oh, I don't know what I did. Okay, try not to go on there. Okay, I'm gonna try to share this. Give me 1 second while I share it, and then I will. Then we can start. Okay, so I got new categories for y'all today.
You playing a game?
Yeah, same thing like I did before. Well, it's a little bit different,
Okay.
but I don't know why it's taking me so long to get this shared. Okay, so this is how we're gonna do the game today. Because I realize it doesn't work so well if y'all are talking over each other. So, category of Black love. I'm gonna give you a category. You have to name 5 things in that category. The first person that starts answering, that's the person that gets to go. And those 5 things in that category, you have to be able to just say the things. No so's, ahs, no filler words. Just answer the 5 things in the category, okay?
Okay.
You got it?
Okay, question mark.
Pop quiz, man.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm with Estee. I need to just like turn my camera off for a minute.
I know, right? Come back.
I know when the game is over.
Not when the game is over.
Okay. So here's the category. So our category today. Wait a minute. Why is my
True.
D. All of the above.
All of the above. That's what I'm.
Our category is 5 desserts that you would see at Black grandma or auntie's house. 5
banana pudding,
Banana pudding.
red velvet cake, pecan pie, sweet potato fluff, peach cobbler, apple cobbler, gingerbread, bread pudding,
Red velvet cake, apple pie,
apple pie,
blackberry cobbler.
7-Up cake, pineapple.
Yeah, 7-Up cake, pineapple.
I won.
Upside down cake.
Yeah, I think Estee won.
Pineapple pie was my grandmother's specialty.
Pineapple pie.
Pineapple. Everybody says that, and I loved it so much. That was my grandma's specialty. And my mom. Here's one that's not on the Black Love Soul Food list. My mom liked to make Italian cream cake.
Oh,
my mom did too.
She did? Okay, so I'm not alone.
I've never heard of that. I never heard of
it. Was so good.
But y'all both from Alabama, right?
My mama is, yeah.
Yeah, I've never heard about that.
Okay, well, what's the pineapple pie? You gotta tell me about that one.
So it was like a double crust pie with canned pineapple and a lot of sugar and butter. It was so good.
Yeah, you can't go wrong with sugar and butter.
Nope.
Never.
Crust? What about
crust?
Okay.
Yes.
What about you, Estee? Was that similar to what you ate?
No, what I was saying is the Italian cream cheese, Italian cream cake. So, but my mother liked to bake, so my mother did a lot of baking, and so that was probably the family least favorite outside of the house. But in our house, we liked it a lot. But my daddy's folks were from Georgia, so like taking that to my grandma's house on Sunday after church, it wasn't a hit. But but everything else, my mother made fruit cake and pound cakes and pound cake with the lemon icing, lemon meringue pie, all that kind of stuff were her things. My grandmother was more the regular pound cake, sweet potato pie, pineapple upside down cake, 7-Up cake, that kind of stuff.
What were your grandmothers known for?
Oh, wow.
Like, what was the thing that when your grandmother showed up, everybody was like looking for?
Sweet potato pie.
Yeah, sweet potato pie and all sorts of desserts, really.
Yeah.
My grandmother wasn't known for anything but holding the dinner, and everybody else would come and they each could do something. So she became famous more so because other people can cook than she could cook. So she only cooked for like us, like her grandkids. She would not cook for outside people. It was still good, but she didn't do it.
Sweet potato pie was my paternal grandmother, but my maternal grandmother, she was potato salad.
Oh yeah.
potato salad, and caramel cake, chocolate cake, and pound cake.
My grandmother, it was the white cake, you know, the white cake with the pineapple in the middle and then the white frosting with the coconut on top.
Oh yeah, coconut cake.
Yeah, coconut cake.
Oh yeah.
Scrape the coconut off because I didn't like the coconut.
You know, I ate so much coconut cake growing up. I can't stomach it now because that was one of the staples that was always there after Sunday dinner. You know, everything else was a coconut cake. I just can't with it now.
It was like that with me with caramel cake.
No, coconut makes everything better. I like coconut cake. That was an Easter specialty, I think, in our house. I liked coconut custard pie. I like German chocolate cake because it had coconut in it.
Nobody said pecan pie.
No, I said pecan pie.
Oh, okay.
Over some other people who were very excited about their desserts, but yeah, I said pecan pie.
In my family, only one auntie could make the pecan pie, or we weren't gonna eat it. So
we had my grandmother had a pecan tree in her yard, so it was like,
everybody
take the tree, you know. So that was
harvest the nuts.
Yeah, my great aunt had the pecan tree, and my cousin and I discussed that. But both of us agreed pecan pie wasn't our favorite, and I don't know if it's because we were on pecan duty in that backyard. I don't know if that's what it is.
Pecan duty was rough. Pecan
it was.
And shelling peas and shucking corn, those three, I ain't got to ever do neither one of those again.
Yeah.
It's not fun.
What was the thing that was always at a family dinner that you couldn't stand as a child, but it was always there?
Black eyed peas.
No, they were so good.
Yeah.
I couldn't stand candy. I don't eat candy yams to this day. I eat sweet potato pie. Don't look at me like
candy sweet potatoes. It's not yams. Candy sweet potatoes.
That's not yams.
It's not yams. Yeah, those are not true yams.
Yes.
So I liked black eyed peas. I like candied sweet potatoes. But y'all, I know this is gonna sound weird, but I did not like the barbecue sauce. I liked the barbecue, but I would ask, could I have mine without sauce? Because I did not like if anybody from my hometown is watching, please don't hold this against me. But I did not like our recipe for barbecue sauce. When I went out into the world and discovered there were other recipes, I was like, I like mine a lot sweeter and a lot spicier.
Yeah.
But I didn't like ours, and so I would ask for it without the barbecue sauce. But I didn't get to tell my grandmother's specialties. My paternal grandmother was known for everything. She was known as a cook. She was a cook. She took a lot of pride and time with all of her dishes. And they were all Southern fare, as far as I remember. But my maternal grandmother, interestingly, did not, she said she wasn't a big cook. So she wasn't known as the cook in the family. But you said what was they remembered for? And I thought of memory in two ways. Mm-hmm. So the larger family, but then my family, I guess you could say nuclear family, my children cannot stop talking about their grandmother's cooking. Mm-hmm. And the last thing they discussed, and I think it's the one that we all love, is her homemade chicken pot pie.
Oh.
And they say you never had real food until Gran makes you a homemade chicken pot pie. And she's going to make it like, I have to make this for you because you have to eat it. But it's so good. It is so good.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Oh, wow. I mean, so on my grandmother's side, I already said, on my mother's side, it was the coconut cake. On my father's side, my grandmother cooked chicken. Like both of my grandmothers were cooks. Like I grew up thinking all black women could cook because they could throw down. And so my paternal grandmother, she always fried chicken, but she fried chicken in the oven.
Oh, my mom does that.
She does. I mean, it was so good and so tender. So it would have the crust. It wouldn't be hard. It would be a tender kind of crust, but she would do that all the time. And my brother and I love that. And then the thing, and I can't do it. I never picked up the skill to be able to do that. But the thing that I really remember my paternal grandmother for is cooked apples. and I cooked that for my girl. I love cooked apples.
I love cooked apples too. My granny used to make that. So I'm Southern, so I got like 15 grandmamas. So my granny used to make cooked apples. She also, now what she was known for, I'm not gonna lie, was grilled cheese sandwich. My granny made the best grilled cheese sandwiches. Like we would all be coming in the house from school, like, Granny, can we have a grilled cheese sandwich? The other thing I thought about too with my paternal grandmother, not just the pie, she was known for being the woman that always had greens on the stove. Like until probably the last, no exaggeration, maybe year of my grandmother's life, there were always, and when it was in season, it was turnips. When it was out of season, it was collard greens. There was always a pot of collard greens, and there were always cornbread on the stove. No matter, I mean, it always.
And that sounds a lot like my grandmother, because her house was the main house, right? Because she was the oldest, the oldest girl. So she always had something cooking on the stove. And so people would just come by. And it's like that at my mom's house today, that people would just come by, grab a plate, eat, socialize, and then leave. But my grandmother was known for these huge meals. And I think it's really interesting that at the time that they lived, my mom remembers growing up with these huge meals at times where a lot of African American couldn't, really afford that type of stuff. So for breakfast, we ate rice 3 times a day, being Gullah Geechee. I can't even say it. But we ate rice 3 times a day. We ate rice for breakfast, we ate it for lunch, and we ate it for dinner. For breakfast, we had sugar and butter. Lunch, it was plain. And dinner, you had a gravy. So in addition to the rice, she would make these huge, elaborate breakfasts, a light lunch, and then a heavy dinner. So that's what she was known for.
Interesting. So when I was growing up, hey Thandi, we see you here. When I was growing up, I had this interesting experience. So I grew up in South Central Los Angeles, and along the side of my grandmother's house. So in LA, houses aren't big. There isn't a lot of backyard and things like that. So you have like the small plot. Along the side of my grandmother's house were collard greens. And so I did not grow up with going to the store and getting collard greens. That was an experience I had as an adult. As a child, if you were going to have collard greens, you would go to the side of the house, and my grandmother had, and I don't even know how she was able to grow them like this, because I tried to grow some greens. Mine didn't get these. They were like tall as people. And you'd go and you'd pick the greens from the side of the house.
Tallest children?
No, well, I don't know, because I was a child. So
yeah.
I feel like they were tall as adults, but I don't know. So that's a good, that's good point.
Right. I have another question. Memory. I just have a quick question for Estee. Was that grilled cheese with the government cheese? Because
that's what my grandma did with the government cheese.
How dare you? How dare you?
But it was with the like the chunks of cheddar cheese that you get from the grocery store. And so she would intentionally like double stack each side, butter both sides of the bread, butter in the cast iron skillet. And I don't know what, I could get it close. I don't know what Granny was doing. But Granny, she also made the baked apples, and she would do interesting things. Like, we used to put added sugar onto the cereal versus buying Frosted Flakes. So I was grown when I was like, I could just buy it. Definitely.
I think everybody did that.
Yeah.
Because my parents were they were the healthy, they were the educated folk who had read books. So they would be like, no, we're going to have whole grain, whatever cereal. But they might let me get away with like Fruit Loops or Fruity Pebbles. But my granny would be like, you gonna take this sugar and toss it over these cornflakes.
But that's interesting, because the whole part of the narrative too is how you get food, whether or not you could go to the store for certain things. We didn't go to the store for a lot, right?
No.
My grandmother, I don't think ever would buy a box of cereal, ever bought a box of cereal. Like, that was something she would never have done. Same with greens. Like, I don't think my mom did, but my grandmother never went. She went down to the country. Whenever you go down to the country, you go get some greens. You go get the stuff that you're going to cook later. You get it out the ground when you go down to the country. Even like some poultry and some whatever, you go down to the country. Like, you don't go to Winn-Dixie, which used to be the big store in South Carolina. So, yeah, no, greens were always there. If the man had to come with his truck, your cousin with the greens on the back, you would have them. But I don't think we ever bought them out the store.
Wait, did y'all have a watermelon man that would come by your house?
Yeah, the watermelon man.
And the watermelon truck.
Collard greens, corn, and really at home they would just be on the side of the road. But we kind of knew where they were. So because everybody had gardens. You know what I'm saying? So it was like if we needed something or something wasn't in season, so maybe the green man, that's what we call him, the green man. He always had huge bunches of collard. He would have cabbage, he would have watermelons, beans, all that stuff.
So I don't remember.
Funny because my mom, going back to what you said, Corrie, my mom and her siblings always liked to recount stories when my grandmother would go home deeper in the country and bring back live chickens. And they said they would have to ride from North Carolina to Virginia with live chickens in the back, everybody holding a chicken and no bag.
Yeah, I don't remember anybody coming by our home. My grandfather, for as long as he was physically able, kept a garden in the backyard. But what we didn't have in that garden, we went to the farmer's market to get. And so there was this big, sort of warehouse area where people would drive in with those trucks that you talked about, and we would go and pick the things. And I knew if we went to the farmer's market and we got purple hull peas or something, I was on shelling duty. But I liked it. I remember it. I liked shelling duty. I didn't like the pecans because they were a little, they were harder and rougher on the hands. But, shelling purple hull peas, I just remember that fondly as time with my family, time with my grandmother. Yeah.
Good afternoon, everyone. If you have just joined us, we are here. We jumped in without any introduction. My name is Dr. Ifetayo Ojelade. I'm a licensed psychologist and hang out here in Atlanta in Muskogee territory. And I am talking with my colleagues, Dr. Corrie Claiborne, who is a professor of Africana Studies at Morehouse College, Dr. Kenja McCray, who is a professor of history at Atlanta Metropolitan State College, my sister, Reverend Estee Nena Dillard, who is also an Orisha priest, and my sister, Professor Nozibele Waithe, who is an anthropology professor and also the owner of Grand Tressa. And we're going to try to get our sister in here. Sound like she's having some technical difficulties. Sister Thandi, are you here? Sister Thandi Chimurenga, she's our social commentator. Yay!
I'm obviously not ready for prime time. I apologize.
That is all right. You came just in time because we jumped in. Because we would start talking about desserts and all kinds of stuff. So we're having this conversation today.
I'm sorry I'm late. I have no idea where y'all are. So where are you?
That's okay. That is okay. So you came right at the right time. So we actually just jumped in and started talking about desserts and what our grandmamas were known for, and just we talked about, it's actually the foundation of what High on the Hog was talking about, is like looking at Black foodways, Black culinary history, and the way that shows up in our families. And I personally think it's an important conversation because when we think about food, it's something that is universal. All of us have to eat it, right? And there's a mental health impact in terms of food. And when we think about the conversations about food, we can see celebrity chefs and people talk. I mean, we got a whole food network in this country, but the face of food in this country, and particularly celebrity chefs, don't look like us. And I've always thought that was interesting because I knew that my ancestors during enslavement and after enslavement were cooks, men and women. And when I think about the conversation about food, it is often a negative conversation when it comes to Black people. Yes. So we're often pathologized, and people talk about how we're overweight and we have high blood pressure and diabetes and all these negative things about soul food. And I'm not saying that any of those things, that there isn't that impact, but there's also this positive impact with food.
It's the way also that the corollaries. There's also the context in which we're living, in the context in which we have lived, and the context in which we're currently living. Like you and I were talking about briefly, you know, our people grew the food. We knew the animals. We worked with the animals. We worked that land. We was also out there working and walking and doing what, you know, y'all people in the South are famous for, oh, it's just right up the road. Meanwhile, 10 miles later, you ain't got there yet. I'm from LA. Okay, I need to know exactly where it is. Is it 30 miles away or is it around the corner? Stop lying. Y'all Southerners be lying. It's just up the road. No, it ain't. No, it's not.
So, Thandi, when you were growing up, did your family grow any food in Los Angeles?
Did. My mother had a garden. My grandparents, my grandmother had a garden. And I was going to say also, as I mentioned earlier, when we talk about a particular context of our families, one of the things that I heard growing up all the time, I didn't understand it, but you know, as an adult, I understand it now. My sister would say it, my mother would say it. My family, my mother's side of the family came from Arkansas. I didn't get the opportunity to go down south and visit during the summers the way my siblings and cousins did. By the time I was born, my grandparents were already out here. I had an aunt and two uncles, but because my grandparents moved to LA, the other children, their children who were back east, they would come out this way to visit their parents. So I missed that land experience. But one of the things that I always heard growing up is, oh, that's a store-bought dress. Or that's some store-bought milk. That's some store-bought bread or store-bought cake. And I was like, And it wasn't until later I realized, oh, y'all made everything at home. You milked the cows. That's why this is store-bought milk. You made your own biscuits. You made your own cake. That's why this is store-bought. And I had seamstresses in my family also. I know that has nothing to do with food, but that's why they say store-bought dress. But I always heard store-bought. It's like, And of course, you know, the ice box. You know, my family literally remembers when you had to get ice and put it in a box to keep everything cold. To this day, my mother would call it the ice box, and not a refrigerator. We've been whirlpooling all up and for decades. It's an ice box. Okay, all right, mama. But the context in which we were eating and living and working, even though white supremacy is terrorism, even though white supremacy is stress, you know, the fact that we would work those plots of land and have little gardens, even during enslavement, was a teeny tiny effort at self-determination, determining our own food, knowing that we couldn't get enough food from massa, that we was going to get scraps. We would supplement. So understanding the context is also key. And the other thing I wanted to mention too, many of us are familiar with the Yoruba or Ifa tradition. You know, what I appreciated about Hound the Hog was the loving way it was presented. And it was, I thought, a very, very holistic way in terms of our culture. I know some people are probably still wondering what the whole Benin enslavement aspect had to do. But for those of us who are familiar with Yoruba traditions in particular, you know, when you have naming ceremonies or when you have rites of passage ceremonies, when you have what we call the 8 or the 9 bowl ceremonies, you know, and when you look at the offerings that are made in this tradition, this spiritual tradition, which some people call a religion, there are staples such as palm oil. That is a staple of Nigerian or Yoruba or West African food. You know, fufu, akara, a lot of the different egusi soup, a lot of the different dishes are staple offerings that we make to the divinities, to the divine. And I know that my teacher who lived there, who I'm sure you're familiar with, Ifetayo, Baba Metahochi. Baba Metahochi once said that religion is the deification of one's nationalism. Our experiences, our culture is sacred. And that doesn't mean that you leave the food out. That doesn't mean that you leave the food out, which is why we still pour libation. It might not be palm wine, it might be Thunderbird or Night Train, but it might be some old English this time. I don't know, but it might be some Henny. I don't know if people want to waste Henny and Patron, but they call it. They might feel they wasting it. But whatever is become a staple is sacred to us. This is what nourishes us and feeds us on a daily. It would make sense to consider it to be sacred and to give thanks and to incorporate it.
So let's open this up. So Tani, that was actually a good kind of segue because we were just talking about our own family, and I want to open this discussion up for us to talk about High on the Hog, because I know that we all saw it, and I'm just wondering, just overall, like, what's your first reaction when you think about the docuseries? And that's for anybody.
I was excited when I first saw it because it was a conversation that we had been having in history, particularly public history, for a very long time in terms of food traditions, African-American food traditions, and in particular, two aspects of those food traditions. One, the way they're rooted in our African heritage, and there are some of the ways that our ancestral heritage has been held over in our culture, and two, the way our culture, our innovations, and our traditions contributed to the development of the United States and continue to contribute to the development of the United States. So I was really excited about, as Thandi says, the loving way that was presented on screen.
I mean, other than tears being my primary reaction, because that was my primary reaction, I really appreciated more than just the food waste conversation, the way that it felt like gentle space was held for us telling our own stories from our own locations. And I don't know that there's enough of that. I think that there is a lot of trying to figure out how to be in conversation with the realities of what it is to be African in America. And I think some come from genuine places, and then you have stuff like Django, right? Which is asinine. So, so I think of the things that I've experienced, this felt very much so like it was gentle, like it was loving, like it was intentional. And it was important to me the way that they were intentional about making sure that we were seen as a part of American history, but still separate and apart from that. And while holding both things in tension in a way that felt honest and that felt truthful and authentic to my own experience. So I thought it was really, really just well done.
Yeah. And to kind of veggie back on what Estee said, I think it was like a love letter to African-American culture and African-American food. And it was very, very beautifully done. It made you fall in love with the culture again, because a lot of times we take things for granted, right? A lot of times, some of us can forget the impact that our cuisine has had on American culture. Sometimes we can forget the uniqueness in terms of the food, not only the food that we cook, but the way that we prepare the food, right? The way that we serve the food, the way that we consume the food, which is all encompasses what a food way is. We take it for granted that we're going to have that coconut cake on Easter, so it brought all those things back to let me fall in love with African-American food and culture all over again. So I appreciated that about the doc.
Yeah, and I was going to say one of the things that I'd always realized, but I think it made manifest in that documentary, is that remembering is powerful. It is a tool of resistance and liberation, right? Like that, and oftentimes I hear a lot of people talk about this, and maybe it is partly sexism because they assume when you talk about food or something like quilting or whatever, it's the domain of women. So it becomes less like people are fighting back. But it is the thing that literally kept us alive, right? Like I think about, even after like the Stono Rebellion in South Carolina, which is in the 1700s, where they outlawed dancing and gathering in groups and speaking your African language. One of the things that they outlawed too was growing your own food. Like they used to say, they didn't feed you. I think that's the big myth that, master provided you with the scraps from their table. It's like, no, you got to figure out how to have your own food. You have to grow it. And so there was a period, and so there would be periods where they cracked down on this, right? Where they said, okay, you know what, you have to stop growing on your own food, because they realized it was giving them too much strength. They were not dependent on white people, that they could like literally have barter and trade amongst themselves, that people could hire themselves out to do certain things. So they were like, you can't do this either. But the fact that they still did it and continued to commit to keeping their foodways alive, even if the master said that they couldn't do it, I think says a lot about how important our food was to us.
When I looked at the documentary, okay, so first of all, like Estee, I mean, I cried each episode. So there were times where I just had to stop and I had to take it in. I mean, it was good tears because it was so beautiful. And to me, I saw it right after we did that last conversation on Black trauma porn. And I thought it was really interesting because I thought it was a beautiful example of how to tell our story, but not make it in this salacious pornographic way where people can basically suck the life out of us. So it told the story and it beautifully sequenced stuff. So I could tell that they must have consulted with a historian or someone because of the way that each part in the series was sequenced. And it was very authentic, and it held space for us in a way that I thought was really just beautiful. What surprised you in the documentary? I mean, I was surprised by tons of stuff, but I'm wondering, like, what stood out where there was something like you were like, oh, I didn't realize that.
For me, I knew a lot of the information. I just was appreciative that it was shown in a venue like Netflix. In particular, since I had been looking at other food shows and shows about chefs, and often the African and African American influences on American cuisine are sidelined at best. But what was surprising was the historical information about, say, the origins of mac and cheese in presidential, enslaved cooks within the presidential household and things like that. I didn't know about that, and I really liked that part.
I'm from Virginia, y'all. Macaroni and cheese started in my backyard. And the really weird thing, when I watched that segment, I thought of a couple of things. I remember how we had to go to Monticello when we were younger. That was like a mandatory field trip that we took, and every other grade we would have to go to the home of Thomas Jefferson. And I remember as a child looking at it, they would talk about these beautiful plantation homes, and then basically, and over there, that's where the slaves lived. So that was, really, really traumatizing. But there is an African American archaeology that started in the, I think it was like the late 60s, that they started to shift the focus from plantation homes to actually look at the spaces and places where enslaved people lived. And we start learning a lot about that. And when I watched that episode of Founding Fathers, Dr. McCray, I thought about you, because remember, you used to work at the Atlanta History Center when we were in college. And whenever they taught you a new technique, you would give them to us as Kwanzaa gifts. So that's what I liked about that as well.
That's funny.
So I think for me, much of the information I knew too. So outside of what's already been mentioned, what was a good reminder is how much we have recreated the same things. So I loved watching the plates, right? So when they would be in all these different places, and I could look at the plate and be like, I don't know what that actually is, because they didn't describe every single thing. But that looked like this, that looked like that looked like this, that my aunties. So the familiarity of how Black genius still took what they had in a different culture, with different soil, with different materials, with different crops, but recreated a version of what was ancestral and indigenous to us in a different place, was a really powerful theme that I saw throughout the series.
And I'll say I knew this, but I appreciated this, the role of men in cooking, especially like, you know, being from coastal South Carolina. I mean, one of the things that you know is, like, for example, the men make the nets that they catch the crab in. They go get the oysters, which are, you know, it's not, well, it is kind of dangerous work, right? Like, they do the fish and then they have the fish fry. So there was always that, you know, that was kind of the world of men. Even today, my uncles cook the fish. You know, if it is any kind of seafood to be had, they go procure it and make it. If it was a crab boil or whatever, that has always been maintained. And I think that is something too, because we always think, oh, well, this is the role of women, but men, from literally making a boat, then making the net, then getting the fish and the shrimp and the whatever, and then making it, right, was like a huge part of our history that I think we don't talk enough about. And making the baskets, like a lot of the seagrass baskets that you see, most people only think about them as women weavers, but men, because they were for utility, made, like, especially early on, most of the baskets that, you know, we would see. And they would throw them away when they, you know, got used. Nowadays, we can't think of that because they're worth thousands of dollars. But yeah.
Thandi, what about you?
I appreciated that also. Yeah. Seeing the involvement of men in cooking on so many levels, I really did appreciate that. The other thing that I think it was new for me, you know, I'm having memory challenges, but just hearing about how I believe it was Jefferson and Washington, I know it was one of Washington's chefs, learned or went to France, was actually able to get to get that knowledge and bring those dishes back, which added to his repertoire. And then he was like, you know what, deuces, I'm out, and go and make a living for himself. And the funny thing, I thought it was hilarious. People in New York be like, George, we seen such and such over here on 83rd Street. You know, there were sightings of these people that they would send back to George Washington or to Thomas Jefferson. And then the brother get ghost again and go someplace else with his talents and be able to sustain himself or his family. I thought that was hilarious.
And Dr. McCray, I mean, so I always think about this. So when I heard that part about Thomas Jefferson, because I forget the brother's name, but when I heard his last name was Hemings, I was thinking, I wonder if he's related to Sally Hemings. And sure enough, that's Sally Hemings' brother. And what they didn't say in the documentary, but then I put together is like, okay, so Sally Hemings was Thomas Jefferson's, technically in real life terms, his sister-in-law. And so that was his brother-in-law that he was enslaved. So he was having sex and producing children and raping his sister-in-law and then enslaving his brother-in-law and having him cook for him. Am I remembering that correctly in terms of lineage? Okay.
Yeah, that Sally Hemings' father was the same father as Martha, I think her name is, Jefferson.
Yeah, his wife.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Now, one thing that I wasn't clear on when they talked about someone was given their freedom if they trained the other one to take his place.
That was him.
So quote unquote, he trained his brother to take his place. The way that it was presented, I'm wondering, did he actually quote unquote leave his brother in enslavement, or is there another way that could have actually been like, I'm gonna get free and I'm gonna send for you, I'm gonna make a way for you? You know, I'm wondering if there was a nuance there that may have been missed. I'm not sure.
I think I just took it as, well, we asked the historian. You got some information on that?
No, I don't know this story well enough to say whether there is a nuance there. I mean, it's always possible, but I mean, if you read, has anybody read Never Caught, about Ona Judge who ran away from George Washington? So that's a good book to read, and you'll get some ideas about family ties and how family ties might have cemented a person in place so that they were reluctant to run away from enslavement, and the agony that someone might have gone through if they saw an opportunity but couldn't take the whole family to get away. And if they, pined for their family and were trying to figure out a way to get the family free, but they just didn't have the bandwidth because they were trying to remain free themselves, as Thandi said, because people would be like, George, I saw on 54th Street when I was in New York, or what have you, you know. So that could give us more clues. I would have to do specific research on that topic to be able to weigh in with any you know, heft.
And but always the literature person can probably give us something.
No, I was just gonna say about the Hemings. We had a discussion about this in American Lit because they were talking about the time when Thomas Jefferson took Sally and her brother to France while he was there, because you know he's this big Francophile. If you saw Hamilton, you kind of know that too. And but what is interesting is that all my students were like, why didn't they just stay in France? They could have been free. They would have been, you know, minding their business. Like people treated them certain kind of ways. They could have just stayed there. And what I understood from that, I mean, of course, Sally Hemings didn't write any kind of narrative. We don't know it from that. There've been a lot that's written about her, right? Annette Gordon Reed, and then what's her name? Barbara Chase Robeau did a novel. But it becomes interesting because what it seems like is that Sally, you know, she doesn't speak French either, but she was like, we need to go back home because our whole family is there, right? Like we can't just leave and be out in slavery. It's almost like she's the one that convinces him to go back. And this is before she has all the kids by Jefferson, right? Convinces him to go back because it won't be a they won't really be free in France, even though they're quote unquote free. So I think there is a moment where, and Sally's never freed, right? Like Jefferson makes, after he dies, so the brother, you know, becomes a chef and leaves. This is after Jefferson dies and he leaves all of their brothers and sisters to his white children, and they do set some of them free. Sally Hemings is never set free. Like she, you know, they said they give her a nice apartment on the side. If you've been to Monticello, I think you can see like, you know, where she lived, right? Like as if, ooh, she done made it, right? Like she's not free, but she can live in the good part. And there's even pictures of his half black daughter. You can sort of Google it. Like there's a painting done of her. But I think that what you know, finally he decides to leave because he realizes the part of the Hemings that are going to be there, they're not ever going to leave, right? Like I think that is, if there is a moment where they sort of break off after Jefferson dies, it's because I think that they realize the family that's going to be there is just going to be there.
Got it.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate because everyone can't be Harriet Tubman. You know what I mean? That is a very difficult thing to do. And I know we touched on some of her, we touched on Harriet Tubman a while back. And the thing that I think is interesting about Thomas Jefferson, like you were saying, Corrie, the actual plantation was segregated. And you had these spaces where the Thomas Jefferson's favorites lived, which was closer to the big house. And then you have where everybody else lived. And there's archaeological evidence that showed that it created a disparity amongst those people because of the things that they ate. So you can go, they had what was called these indoor storage spots, where the enslaved people would dig holes in the cabins and they would put all the pilfered goods in there. So they would hide the food that they took from the big house. They would hide china and all of these things. So at Mulberry Row over at Thomas Jefferson's place, you get to see this. You get to see some of the cups that were hidden. You get to see the bones that's left over from the meat that was cut in a different, the same way that they cut in the big house, right? And then you would look at the ones that were a little far off. And the people who stayed further away from the big house, their diets were very, very poor. You know, archaeological evidence said that they had a shorter lifespan, you know, that they couldn't produce as many, they had a harder time. So those types of things are interesting. And they said in a documentary how Thomas Jefferson was really, really meticulous about all of the things that he ordered. So, you know, with the record, so we kind of knew what they ate, how they ate it, and how favoritism can kind of like, and colorism created those divisions in those living spaces.
And I want to kind of shift us, like move us along to the second, because I think that you guys are talking about the third one, but in the second part of the documentary series, we see the sister that's on the land, and I hate that I don't remember her name or Sally Hemings' brother's names. I need to pull those names up because I want us to give voice to those names. But the sister that was living in New York and goes back to North Carolina and is on her family's land and growing food and learning from her ancestors. And I think that is a really powerful statement about the ways in which some ways that we've moved away from food. Kind of goes to Thandi, your conversation about stuff being store-bought. I know growing up, store-bought stuff was considered better than if it was homemade, or if you could go to the store and buy groceries as opposed to getting stuff out of the garden. And now we kind of see this renaissance where things are moving back to this ability to be able to feed ourselves. And the thing that really got me, I don't know about y'all, but was when they cooked that whole hog and they made their own charcoal. They had them little grates. They didn't go to Home Depot and buy them or Costco and buy them a barbecue pit. They cooked the whole hog for the entire community. Now, I don't know about you, but me, I don't eat hog. But I was like...
But wasn't nothing store-bought, though.
And I thought that was powerful. Because Angelina and I said, so, okay, if the revolution go down tomorrow, what we going to do? We going to cook everybody some mushrooms?
Well, let me tell you, they cooking whole hogs at my grandmama's property in Alabama every 4th of July. So it just happened last week. It's literally called the hog killing, and it is happening right now. Like, my family still does it. And it used to be for our family in particular because our family's huge, but now it's a community thing, and people have spade tournaments, and so now they cook more than one hog, and it's the whole thing. But if the revolution happened, we can go to Sunflower, Alabama, McIntosh, Alabama, and we'll be just fine. Just well fed, have refuge. We got land, property, houses.
We gotta take you up on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I'm not eating a hog, but it's plenty of chickens.
But that's the thing. I don't think you have to eat it, right? Like, because I remember my great-grandparents down in Effingham, South Carolina, they always had hogs. We made hogs. I remember like a family reunion down to the country, as I said, and they would do that whole dig up a pit, make a hog. But most people didn't eat it. I don't know if it's because they had high blood pressure. I don't know what it was, right? Like, I think that was sort of like, this is what we do in community. This is what we do as part of the community. But it doesn't necessarily mean that that's what we're going to eat. And even in general, I think that most of my, great-grandparents, like, I remember them very well. Like, they didn't eat a lot of meat in general, even though they had chickens and hogs and whatever. It was like every big celebration, like it would have to be 4th of July, right? Before they would eat ham, or Christmas or whatever. It wasn't like, okay, it's Monday, so what I'm about to do is have this bacon for breakfast. Then I'm about to have this chicken picked up out the yard. Then I'm going to have all this, They didn't do that. It was rice. It was grits. Maybe they would have fish, but I always remember a lot of vegetables. It was things that if you had meat, it was like you had it again, right? We have something that's very regional to a certain part of the Gullah Coast. It's not even the whole thing, which is called chicken perlo or prelo, depending on how you pronounce it. But it's like you take something, and anything could be a perlo. So turkey, chicken, shrimp, whatever. It's like you had it one day in a big celebration. And then what you do is you have a whole pot of rice, and then you kind of put onions and all these spices and put the chicken in there. And then you make what you call a perlo, a chicken bog, people call it too. And then you would literally have that for whenever. But you wouldn't have that again because it was off of the leftovers of a big meal. But then you wouldn't sort of think that you were going to have that every day. Like, you couldn't just go ask your mama to go make some chicken bog. Like, no, it'd be like, Did we have this big meal? Did we have a big pig? Do we have leftover stuff that we can then go put in this pot of rice? Okay, then you're going to have it, right? But it's not something that, you know, I think that that's one of our biggest health concerns, why we think, you know, that our ancestors meant we were supposed to eat like this heavy stuff every single day when they did not do that. Too.
I think too
I was going to just say, I thought you would ask a question, Dr. Ojelade, about future episodes, how we would envision future episodes. And I was going to talk about this at that point, but it fits here. I think what we're missing in the conversation, what was missing in High on the Hog, was walking us through of how the foodways, the food traditions, African-American food traditions were labeled soul food, in what context, because that, I think now we take for granted that it was always called soul food, but that was a particular naming that came out of the Black Power movement, late civil rights movement. So with that naming came some other conceptions about what Black foodways were and what they should be, and some discussions about how much of the foodways is shaped by slavery, enslavement, and limitations on our traditional ways of eating. And in that discussion, we can't discount the Nation of Islam and other Black nationalist foodways and the circulation of How to Eat to Live. And I think by the time we get to the 1990s, when we're adults and we're in control of our foodways, I know I'm going to tell an anecdotal story. I had other people who are Black nationalist minded who are like, "Oh, sister, you eat pork, take the pork off your plate. This is what's causing your grandparents to have all this high blood pressure and all these health problems that they're having." And it really affected me. I used to have nightmares about it. And so the transition to vegetarianism and then veganism wasn't difficult for me. But the bottom line was I still gained weight exponentially on a vegetarian diet, because like what we're saying, a lot of it is portion control, how much you move, how much you're sedentary, right? Calories in, calories out. And so if I have a small pork cutlet and some greens, is it going to make a difference in my diet? Or, am I going to have this big bowl of split pea soup and this big piece of cornbread and yams and then go sit down and write about it, which is what I was doing. So I think what could happen more, I think what will extend the conversation is when we talk about the overlap of Black nationalist foodways with our traditional foodways that we got from African Americans, and then the African foodways influence together.
And I saw somebody gave me the name. So James Hemming. So I just want to lift that brother's name up as an ancestor in Black culinary traditions. I think what you were saying is significant, because one of the memories I have, and it makes me tearful every time I think about it, was I remember I told you on both sides my grandmothers were cooks. And so my maternal grandmother, my brother and I had gone to her house, and she had cooked a big Thanksgiving dinner. And my brother and I, young, I'm probably 19, 20 at the time, super pro-Black, getting into all the Black nationalism. And my grandmother cooked greens that had meat in them. And my brother and I were like, "Oh, we don't eat the pork," or whatever. And it was so insulting to my grandmother. And I'm embarrassed, honestly, that I did that. And I think about the importance. I mean, my grandmother poured so much love into food, and that was one of her clear ways of showing that she loved her family. And for me and my brother to turn up our nose like, "Oh, we can't eat that kind of stuff." That little pork, I'm 19 years old, running around LA all the time, that eating those greens with that pork in it was not going to end my life. And I think that that's one of the things that I've learned, 20 plus years later, is to not be so dogmatic about food in ways that disconnect us. Like hearing these kind of white supremacist ideas of like, your food is unhealthy and terrible and it's going to kill you, to the point where it sets up hostility with my family. That's not Black nationalism.
And it's not loving at all, definitely.
No.
But you know, the other thing that I wanted to just posit, just drop it into the conversation, because I think it should be acknowledged, and we can talk about it more in depth later. I talked about the Yoruba tradition earlier. You know, there's a spiritual aspect. We are an African people. We are a spiritual people, whether we believe that or not, whether we believe spirit is real, whether we acknowledge it or not. Our ancestors, it's an abundance of information that shows how our ancestors felt about spirit. And one of the things that I don't think we talk about enough is taboos, food taboos. Food taboos are a serious part of African traditional culture. And some of that we carried with us. And some of that, I'm not sure, I mean, to a Western trained eye, it might just be a fluke, but some of us can see how a person may be affected if they're eating something they should not be eating. Like there could be a spiritual reason for that. There could be a spiritual agreement that was broken that affects a person today. For example, I know my brother has like some people have this aversion, this what's the word? You have to forgive me. I'm having short-term memory loss. Allergic to seafood allergy. You know, and now for some people, I don't know why it could be that way, but for some other people, it could be that an agreement was made long ago that you will not eat, or your lineage will not touch this, or your lineage will honor the sea, and your consuming of that which came from the sea is breaking an agreement. Or the reason you're having trouble in your life is because you're consuming something that is not good for your lineage. So, you know, those are interesting things that I'm finding out about now. Of course, the majority of Black folk are gonna be like, get out of here with that. But I think it's an area deserving of study and of at least inclusion in the dialogue.
And Estee, I see you want to say something about that. I want to pull Nozibele in on that too, from an anthropological perspective. So what Sister Thandi is talking about is like from a spiritual tradition, whether it be in Ifa, a Khan, it can be in Vodun, and African spiritual traditions. Oftentimes people have spiritual taboos. So there's messages that come from spirit that tell people things that they should eat. But then there's also messages that tell people things that they can avoid. So I be hurting because one of my taboos is I can't eat, what's the bread that the Ethiopians eat, and I love that stuff.
Injera.
Man, that
real quick too, I wanted to mention I wanted to mention it and now it's gone, so I'll jump back in on that later.
Okay, Esther, go ahead.
Okay, I actually was thinking about my comment that I was going to make earlier. It relates to what Thandi was saying, because for me, what I wanted to raise is it's really about relationship. You know what I'm saying? Like there's a relationship that we have as African folks to creation. And so I thought about needing to name that when Professor Claiborne, Dr. Claiborne was talking about, you know, like how we consume the food and how we consume the meat in particular, because watching my grandmother raise chickens, she had a relationship to those chickens. So she wasn't going to kill them. You know what I mean? Like, in fact, my grandma would fight you. I've seen my grandmother kill other animals because they wasn't finna with her chickens. You know what I'm saying? Like, you ain't mess with them. My grandmama raised none of us. Humans, chickens, vegetables, garden, pecans. You know what I'm saying? Like, you weren't coming in her yard. So you know, if you know me, that's my namesake. So that we don't want, you know, And so, but it was because there's a relationship there. And also how you see it as a resource. You know what I'm saying? Like with the hog. With my family, now we did eat pork. I was the weird one. But I will say too, there was a utility for all of it. So you were gonna make hog head cheese, which we saw in a documentary. Mm-hmm. There was going to be soups made. There was going to be fat back made. There was going to be pork belly cut. There was going to be certain cuts of meat that were going to be saved. And so there was a way that we also had a utility from the ruler to the tutor. Where even skin and all of that was consumed and used. And so then you could eat off that one hog for months at a time because of how we were in relationship to it. And so for me, that very much so is ancestral. That's spiritual as well, because part of what I think has been lost is our spiritual relationship to how we eat and why we consume what we consume, and the utility that it has, not just for our bodies and for our sustenance, but for our spiritual ability to maintain ourselves and have a resource.
Right. Okay. Go ahead.
Real quick before I forget, what word I was thinking about was epigenetics. Mm-hmm. So when we talk about epigenetics, we should also look at our relationship to food and how it has changed over time in terms of how we relate to it individually, how it relates to our DNA, how it relates to our, not just our psychic makeup, but our bodies in terms of the diet that we were used to, and then we get over here in the predominant diet of the land.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. We're right at 1 o'clock. Nozibele, I'm gonna let you go, and then Dr. McCray, I know you're gonna share you can close out by sharing the clip with your cousin and give us some context around that.
Okay. I think to go along with what Thandi said and Estee, is that African people, especially in the Yoruba, the Igbo, the Voodoo, the Akan tradition, realize the importance of the life force, the Ashe that lives in animals, the Ashe that lives in plants, and the Ashe that lives in us. So when we killed an animal, when we harvested vegetables, when we did any of those things, we understood that it was a special relationship that we had with the life force that was a part of God. Right. So when we killed the chicken, or when we did that, it was with the understanding that not only will we nourish our spiritual body, but we'll also nourish our spiritual body, our communal body, our family body, all of these things that was tied into cooking. And a lot of times people, they kind of assume that slavery had just cut us off from African culture. And that's not true at all, because Sterling Stuckey talks all the time about African-American cultural continuities. And one of the things that I mentioned earlier about the indoor storage pots, when they did archaeological evidence, they tied that back to the Igbo people in Nigeria, that they used these indoor, they would dig holes by their doors, and they would put implements of certain voodoo or orisha in by the doors to protect their houses. They would put, lack of a better term, gree in those holes. So the same holes and the same type of indoor storage pots that you would see in Nigeria, you can look at some of the enslaved quarters and see the same things, that they took the food that they ate and they took a portion of that food and they laid it out for their ancestors as a sacrifice, still continuing along with the Ashe and, eating the food that's good for you, knowing that this person should eat this and not that, it was still continued.
Yeah. Dr. McCray. So, okay, let me set this up just a little bit. So part of what we talked about being able to do with this series is to interview people that are in our family. And so we'll have a part 2 of this. And this is going to be like a little teaser. So Dr. McCray interviews somebody in her family about their food ways coming from Alabama. So you want to talk a little bit about that and then show the clip?
Sure. So I interviewed my cousin, David. He is David Watkins. He is my paternal side, my cousin on my paternal side. So his grandmother is my grandmother's sister. I don't know which cousin that makes him, third, second. Third, I think.
Cousin.
No, his grandmother's my great aunt. So he is a trained chef, and he has a business called David's Decadent Delights, and he is expanding his business into finger licking eats. But we chatted a long time, and we have an interesting relationship to food traditions in our family, and he carries those food traditions on in a lot of ways. He had a restaurant before COVID, and he named it after his grandmother, my great aunt, and his paternal grandmother, Pearl. And he's here in this clip discussing what he decided to put into the restaurant and what he decided to leave out and all kinds of things. And he's not the only one. We have a legend in our family that our patriarch on our maternal side, Henry Lyles, actually built Homewood Church of God, which is still in existence today, based on in large part sales of his wonderful barbecue. And that recipe is in our family. There's a business my cousins have set up in Birmingham called Roadside Barbecue, but that's a different set of cousins. So here you're going to hear from my cousin
the recipes
David.
You got from your grandmothers.
So, of course, being from Birmingham, you know, soul food is the thing. So my thing was we were doing a soul food buffet. Of course, when I first started, we was just doing pop-ups. So we were just serving different meals. So, of course, the mac and cheese, collard greens, fish, fried chicken, pork chops, all the good stuff that we're accustomed to growing up. Sunday dinner, basically, what you got every day of the week. So my thing was I always tried to be better than my grandparents, or better than, you know, anybody. You provide me the foundation. My thing is to perfect it. That was my whole thing. So I got my grandma used to cook green beans every Sunday. Like, that was her thing. And I hated green beans growing up because we ate them all the time. So I had to figure out a way to make myself like green beans again. So I just had to tweak the different recipes. And, you know, pot roast was another thing that she always cooked on Sundays, smothered pork chops. So it was just taking the things that I grew up on Sundays, every Sunday, because we had Sunday dinner every Sunday. Well, believe it or not, we had dinner with her every day because she cooked every day of the week except Saturday and Sunday. That was the only day that she didn't cook. So we were familiar with food that was gonna keep you full. Like, I'm not the type of person that goes to fast food restaurants, McDonald's, because that doesn't really sustain me. I'm the type of person, I have to have a full meal, and people don't understand that, but that's what I grew up on, 3 meals a day, and they were hearty meals. So that was my thing, making sure people had comfort food that they were accustomed to or brought them memories of back home. So
That was just a sneak peek. So I'm excited for us to all come in and share and talk. And he had more to say, and I'll just leave it at that for this week.
Okay, thank you. So for those that are listening, hopefully if you haven't seen High on the Hog yet, you will have a chance to see it. It is an excellent docuseries. Again, it is on Netflix. I saw one, I missed this comment. Alethea said in the Caribbean, Corrie, that chicken purloo, they call it chicken pilau, I think, in the Caribbean. And so you see those connections again.
Exactly. Like I always say, you know, South Carolina is a colony of Barbados. So a lot of times it'll be like, so we just picked up, they just literally brought it straight over. So the pronunciation of the thing might have changed, but it is the same thing.
You can see these connections everywhere. So everyone, do me a favor. If this conversation was something that was impactful to you, then do me a favor, give it a like, give it a thumbs up. You can also share this with folks in the YouTube world, you know, I mean, the YouTube and the Facebook world, there are all kinds of algorithms. And so what makes a difference for us is you just being able to share this video and making a comment or liking it. That what allows other people to be able to see it. So take care.